Many thanks. I now call on Sarah Boyack with 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, I too welcome this debate. I read the committee's report with interest and I would want to congratulate the committee, the clerks and all those who gave evidence to this committee for what's enabled a really good report to be in front of us today that we can now pick up and take forward. These are very tough economic times, but how can that be a justification for people being expected to work for a wage which cannot enable them to support their families, for a wage which has to be subsidised by the state to ensure that their children are not brought up in poverty? And how can our tough economic times be an excuse of not acting? Politics is about priorities and about doing what is right, and surely this is a proposal whose time has come. In our manifesto last year, Scottish Labour supported the adoption of a living wage by public sector employers, and I want to credit our then leader Ian Gray for taking a lead on this issue and making it a key plank of our manifesto. But I also want to pay tribute to the campaigning work carried out by my colleague John Park, who introduced his living wage bill in the last session of Parliament, and for the consultation he carried out. And I would also want to welcome those councils who have already implemented the living wage and those who have given notice that they intend to implement the living wage. But I start from the premise that the Scottish Government is crucial in this debate, because we believe that the Scottish Government has a key role to play in taking the lead and setting an example and making it easy for people to address the issue. In the public sector, there's clearly an appetite and an opportunity for change. And a lead from the Scottish Government could make a real difference, because it's not just the staff who work in the public sector. Yes, of course.
John Wilson.
Thank Ms Boyack for giving way. Could I remind Ms Boyack that the Labour Party, who control in the UK Government, had authority over the national minimum wage, despite the campaign that was started in 2001 to introduce the living wage, never took that opportunity while in government to raise the national minimum wage to a living wage that would have actually covered every worker, not only in Scotland, but also in the UK.
I'd make the point to the member that the Labour Government did increase the national minimum wage repeatedly to make sure that it kept up. And in fact, the fact we are discussing the living wage now is testament to the campaigning that trade unions have done with us to make sure that it's firmly on our agenda. And we have a chance to act. And it's not just the staff in the public sector, whether it's central or local government. There's also, as people have pointed out, employees of companies seeking to carry out contracts for the public sector. I listened very carefully to the Minister's comments. I welcome the fact the Scottish Government is investigating this issue with the European Commission, but I think this all looks to the need for the Scottish Government to take a lead itself. In evidence to the committee, the GLA made clear that in their view the EU's procurement legislation was not automatically an obstacle to action. So I think we need work done for the whole of the country, and I think the Scottish Government is best placed to do that. That would also address the concern expressed by some that it should not just be public staff who benefit from the living wage. And I agree, but I believe the transformative power of the Scottish Government needs to be brought to bear. That's why a living wage unit would be important. And that's why I welcome the Minister's comments if he's saying today that he thinks that the living wage should be put into the Sustainable Procurement Bill. It would be good to get that confirmed on the record. In this context, the voluntary sector is important to consider. And we know there's a huge pressure on the viability of many voluntary sector organisations, particularly those bidding for contracts for work in local authorities. It wouldn't be right for local authorities to raise their own staff out of poverty pay, but still expect those who carry out work for them to pay their staff less than they would pay their own. And it's particularly important for young women and children who are often paid much less than the living wage. The Save the Children briefing highlights the fact that 43% of those earning less than £7 an hour are women, and 2/3 of all low-paid workers are women. And where the living wage has been implemented, there's been a huge benefit for women. The Scottish Borders Council is not unusual in that 85% of the employees who benefited were women. And one of the most powerful arguments for the living wage is the issue of tackling poverty pay and lifting people out of poverty. And for all the comments that have been made so far about the relationship with benefits, I think it's worth looking at the living wage campaign work and the Save the Children campaign work that shows that people with children are still better off, and that we shouldn't get sidetracked on the issue of benefits. We need to pursue it, but that should not stop us campaigning for the living wage. And the benefits that Joe Fitzpatrick recorded are also wider than tackling poverty. The benefits to the employers, recruitment, retention, absenteeism, raising of staff morale, all things mentioned by the GLA. And we know smart employers will negotiate with their staff to bring benefits to both sides. This is an opportunity. South Lanarkshire make the point that employees who earn at the living wage level spend money locally and the money goes back into local businesses. Surely that's a win-win for everybody. And I'd also commend South Lanarkshire, who've not just addressed the living wage, they're also boosting the wages of staff on modest salaries on £21,000 by £250. 76% of those staff are women, so there's a real gender issue here. And it's not just the private sector. We should also be encouraging the public sector, It's also the private sector. And there are companies who've taken the lead who've benefited from this. So we need to make sure that we get a positive response from the Scottish Government today. I'd like to hear more clarity on support that they will give to implementing the living wage. We need clear leadership, a dedicated living wage unit in the Scottish Government, and we need action and procurement to ensure that the living wage is rolled out across the labour market. That's why we would support the implementation of the living wage. I hope the Scottish Government will listen to us today. We need that political will, a commitment to lead, a commitment to act. And I hope that today's debate will help secure the determination to ensure that Scottish employees will see a living wage.
Thank you very much. Now call on